guys. My name is Sanjana Saini, and I am a student pilot. And I know you guys, I think some of you probably have an exam after this. So I'm going to try to keep it as short and concise as possible and try to give you as much information as possible in the meantime. And I won't introduce myself too in depth because it's already been done. So I'll just directly get into all the content that I have to share with you guys. So, perfect. Okay. So, an introspective into a career in aviation. Now, something that a lot of people don't really know is, how do you get into aviation? You see pilots, you see cabin crew, you see so many other people working at the airport, but it is so hard to, understand how one actually gets there. And that's where I come into play today to help you navigate your way into this. So let's start with the types of jobs that you have at the airport. So first being the pilot, obviously. So pilot, you can break down types of pilots into captain, who has the most responsibility, and then comes the first officer. So the first officer is kind of like either a new pilot or a pilot who's basically just assisting the captain in doing all the other cockpit management. And then comes cabin crew, as I think a lot of you guys might be familiar with that. You interact with the cabin crew almost every time if you've ever flown. And their job is to basically help the passengers and make sure that everything on board is done systematically, safely, and basically take care of the passengers. Then you have the air traffic controller. Now, I know, I come from a family of pilots, and most of my family friends are also pilots. I had no idea what an air traffic controller was, you guys. I know. So an air traffic controller is someone who basically helps. They talk on radio with the pilots, and they make sure that different airplanes on either whether they're on the runway, whether they're taxiing, whether they're flying in air, there is traffic separation. Everything is being done safely. If there's any emergency assistance required during flight. So they basically are in touch with the pilots, and they are in constant communication regarding anything and everything. So that, as you can tell, is a very important role. And they usually sit in these big towers, and they make sure they have the entire peripheral view of, basically the runway, like this image right here. So they know which plane's going where and basically are in constant communication. Then obviously you have the engineers. You want to make sure that the planes are maintained properly. And so that's where a aircraft maintenance engineer comes into play. Then you have ramp agents. So who exactly is a ramp agent? Now, ramp agent is basically someone who helps loading cargo in the plane. So whenever if you've ever flown, or if you ever plan on flying in the future, and you sit inside the plane and the plane hasn't yet started taxiing, or is not going to fly anytime soon, you could probably see these guys. They're still busy putting in luggage and other cargo inside the belly of the plane. So those are the ramp agent guys, and they make sure that all your bags are put in a certain order, and the weight allotment is done in a certain way. So that's, again, a very important role right there. Then you have passenger service agent. So this is something that I currently am working at the Vancouver International Airport myself as. And basically, a passenger service agent is someone who helps you get your boarding passes, who helps you get, board the plane. So anyone who's at the airport that you first most likely will see, from an airline sitting across the counters, that's basically them. They take your cabin bags and, all the check-in bags and everything, and they weigh. And if you're overweight, then yes, these are the people who then ask you to pay extra. Yeah. Then you have flight dispatcher. So, flight dispatcher is someone who basically, keeps a track of all the details about a flight. So these guys are, they prepare everything related to a flight. So we have something called flight plans. So we do that stuff, and dispatchers make sure that even during flying, if there is any, let's say there's an emergency of any kind, then they can talk to the pilots as well. But this is more specific to airline operations. And then crew scheduler, again, they basically make sure who basically, which pilots are flying, which cabin crew has to go up. So it's more like, how at the beginning of the year, you guys get a timetable. So it's something like that. A crew scheduler basically gives pilots a timetable, like, oh, these are the days you guys are going to work, and these are the times. So pilots work, odd hours. Sometimes you're flying in the morning, sometimes you're flying in the afternoons, evenings, nights. So these guys basically help you guys, figure those things out. Now, role of a pilot. Okay, this is something that I would want to talk about. So, role of a pilot is basically very multi-dimensional, from, again, talking to the ground, to flying, to navigating, to, basically doing everything. So it seems like, okay, a pilot, all he has to do is, fly the plane. And the thing is, nowadays, you guys, probably might know that planes are mostly automated. So a lot of, at least my friends think, okay, like flying is basically nothing. You just press buttons and then you call it a day. But that's so not the case. There's so much more to it. There's constant calculations that go inside. As you can see the image right here too, there are a lot of screens, a lot of buttons. You need to know exactly what to do. And, the main role of a pilot is not just to, just make sure that everything is being done smoothly, but to be ready for an emergency. So that is something that is, put as the main focal point for our training as well. When you train to become a pilot, it's basically to be sure of, all your procedures and stay on top of things. So right here, so I basically fly a very small plane myself, but this is the kind of checklist that we're given. So you guys, as you can see, there are like different sorts of, situations that you could get. You could get a wing fire, or you could get a cabin fire right here, electrical fire in flight. And then you have engine failure, again, at different phases of flight. So it could be during the takeoff run, in flight, any point. So that is something that, is a very important part of, being a pilot, is to be ready. Work, like, anything can happen. You have to be on your toes. You have to be constantly monitoring things and making sure everything is, done as safely as possible and as efficiently as possible. Moving on. Okay, so now, if I have convinced you to be a pilot, or, you're still kind of like, okay, maybe, where do you begin? How do you become a pilot? So again, looking at this image, these are the kind of planes you initially fly, not the big ones that you previously saw. Those are later on in your careers. You end up flying planes like these, really small, and they're single engine right in the front right there. And these are, the planes that you will do your training on. You learn how to fly this plane. You learn, like, this checklist right here. You have, emergency procedures, all that stuff. And you basically learn how to figure everything out. You learn how to make radio calls, all that stuff, all here. So it looks like a small plane. It is a small plane. I feel like some cars are probably bigger than these planes, but trust me, people fit in these planes and they're super safe to fly. And these are basically the training planes that, initially a student pilot is expected to do their training on. And now these are basically the general requirements that you need to be a pilot. First things first, medical fitness is key. Now, this is a very underrated statement because I know a lot of people who, fixate over the qualifications in terms of knowledge and skills and everything. But trust me when I say this, medical fitness, if you don't have medical fitness, you could be the best pilot in the world, but you won't be allowed to fly. This is one thing that every pilot has to be sure of. They have to make sure that they're medically fit. That being not necessarily meaning that you have to go to the gym every day, just a normal, medical fitness in terms of just, maintaining your weight to a certain limit, and, your eyesight, your hearing, and things like that. You have blood tests and urine tests and all those kind of things that you have to do, x-rays and stuff. And it's an annual thing. So you have annual checkups for this. And further on, you have different categories of medical. So a pilot has to do the most intense kind of medical, and a cabin crew, they also have medicals, but they're not as severe because obviously, like pilots are the ones who are controlling the plane. So, they have to be the most fit. Moving on. Okay, so age. So minimum 18 years is what I've written, but this is if you plan on doing your commercial pilot license, your CPL. PPL, you could probably do it at 17 or 16, but this is the main minimum age that even airlines expect you to be when they're hiring you when you get your commercial license. So, if you guys are in 11th grade, going to 12th, really good time to consider this, think about it. And by the time you're done with your 12th grade, you're already, you check one box right here off this list. So that's pretty good. And physics and math. Now, you need these two subjects in your 11th and 12th to become a pilot in India. And so minimum requirements is that you need to have at least 50% in your in both of these subjects. So that's not a really big requirement, as you can tell. I know that universities, even to be an engineer, you need like 90% or so. So to be a pilot, you don't really need to be very sharp, but you need to be good with your basics. So if you start building your base from like 8th or 9th grade, that would really help you guys out a lot. And these subjects are definitely a requirement if you plan on being a pilot in India. And further moving on to the written exam. So again, to be a pilot, you have to study all your life. I know that sounds crazy, but when you're a pilot, you study things on and on. You have revision exams every year or every 6 months. And so these are the subjects that you guys are going to be exposed to. If you ever want to be a pilot, these are the subjects for you. So you have air law. So air law basically is a subject, as the name suggests, law. You need to know what you can do and what you should not do. You can say no if someone asks you to do something which is not a part of this law, not a part of these requirements. And you should know what is accepted, what is not. And trust me, this is really important. And the next subject is meteorology, which is to do with weather. And that, again, is very important in terms of understanding how you are going to fly. I don't know if a lot of people know, but, you're flying a plane. So one of the most important determinants is going to be winds, So to take off or to land, you basically make sure you are landing or taking off into the wind. So if the wind is coming from in front of you, that's how you want to take off. And so you want to make sure okay, winds being a very important criteria that helps you out. And then whether or not they're strong winds, sometimes pilots are just they refuse to take off, or they can say, okay, it's a no-go because the winds are too strong for me. And this is really important, especially when you are a student pilot. Your wind limitations are not going to be very crazy. Obviously, a pilot who has 10,000 hours of experience, or who's flying 737s or A320s, airline planes, they're going to have, higher limits. And someone who's just starting, their limits are not going to be that crazy. So you have to understand that. Then you have turbulence. I'm pretty sure if you've ever flown in a plane, you would have experienced turbulence at some point in the flight, during takeoff, maybe during en route phase, or even landing. And you have to understand, how much turbulence is acceptable, and not just in terms of pilot capabilities, but you have to understand that in terms of, if your plane can take it, if it's a big plane, sure, it can take more turbulence, it can tolerate it. And a small plane, it's going to be knocked off. So you have to understand that. Then you have to understand clouds and, like natural phenomenon like thunderstorms or tornadoes. You can't really fly in that. Even if you have a big plane, no one flies through those things. So you have to understand forecast weather, current weather, and you have to, kind of like analyze the trend. Like, is the weather becoming better? Is it becoming worse? And it's a really interesting subject because, trust me, predicting weather is almost impossible, but it is so crucial to flying. Next topic being technical general. So again, it's a really vague subject, but it's got a combination of a lot of topics. So you understand aircraft engines and systems and the theory behind flying. And this is probably the only part where the most amount of physics that you're ever going to use. And it's got to do with, understanding your plane. We have different types of engines. So you have to understand what type of engine does your plane have, or what type of landing system does your plane have. So this basically gives you a general idea about, a normal understanding about what kind of things are there. And then you are taught something which is more specific to your plane. So for example, I fly a Cessna 152 for my training. So this is basically called a pilot operating handbook. And this basically tells me what my plane is allowed to tolerate and what it cannot. So it's got, things like this right here. It explains all these systems, and, this has to do with cabin heating and ventilation. So it's things like that. It talks about fuel system. What type of fuel system does it have? What type of landing system? So like right here, it talks about the fuel systems. Like these are the fuel tanks and how is the fuel flow done? Things like that. So that has to do with this topic right here. Last is navigation. So again, even when you're driving a car, obviously you need to know where you are, where you're going to go, how are you going to go. So when you're driving a car, you basically have things like, okay, let's just Google this, like use Google Maps and navigate. We have similar things. We definitely have similar things for navigating in a plane. However, we don't use satellites initially in the part of the training because they want you to understand navigation. So you basically use charts and you draw lines and you figure stuff out. And that basically, gives you a better idea about how are you going to figure out where to go. Sometimes, you can't really draw a straight line, even though you're flying up in air, you can't really draw a straight line because you're like, let's say there's a mountain ahead. So you have to, fly around it. Or, let's say the weather is bad in that area, so you have to go through a different area. So navigation really helps you understand not only like how to go to a place, but, we have airspace restrictions and things like that. So that all that stuff comes into the subject, and it's a really vast subject, but it is one of the most helpful subjects ever. Radio license. Okay, so I don't know if I sent Priyanshi a video of me flying. So I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I'll definitely play one towards the end of this meeting, and you guys can actually hear the radio calls in the video. So radio license is required for you to operate radio in a plane, whether you are ATC or whether you're a pilot. If you're working at the airport and you need to make a radio call, you know, you need to have a license. So there are obviously licensing requirements. I'm not going to get too in depth into these things, but you're basically taught how to talk. So it's going to be very, very short and concise conversations. You don't really, talk to people like, oh, hi, how are you? It's just mostly like, okay, whoever you're talking to and who you are, and you just tell them where you are and what your intentions are. So if suppose I have to take off, I would just, whichever airport I'm at. So I fly from Boundary Bay Airport here in Canada. So my calls are going to be like, okay, Boundary Bay ground. This is Cessna 152 Golf Victor November uniform. On the apron, requesting taxi for takeoff with information Bravo. So you basically just give them a general idea about what you are talking about, what you want to do, and that's just it. You don't really waste time on radio. So those kind of things are covered in this. Then you have aviation English. Now, this subject it's not a really difficult one because, again, in India, we are taught English from a very young age. So I'm pretty sure most of us are, pretty decent at it. But, the word aviation added to the front part of that, English word kind of has some weightage. So here, basically, they want to make sure that your pronunciations are clear. Doesn't matter if you have an accent or not, but they want to make sure when you're talking, you sound clear. They want to make sure you understand other people's conversations, you can talk. So it's things like that, which again, you have an exam here and there are certain criteria that you have to meet and all that stuff, passing marks, of course. But it's one of the most easy subjects, but you have to meet this requirement as well. Last but not the least is flight hours. Okay, so this is the fun part where you actually get to fly the plane. So crazy, so fun. And for commercial pilot license, you need a good about 200 hours. So in flying, our resumes are mostly built on the number of hours that we fly. So in school right now, when you go to college, it's mostly like, okay, I have an internship. I did an internship at this place for 2 months. But for flying, we basically have flight hours. So for commercial, we have good about 200 hours, and that's the minimum requirements. And then there are further requirements that you have inside that. So, you fly on your own. That is solo hours, and they're called PIC hours because you are the pilot and commander. You're flying all alone. You're enjoying, sure, you're taking charge, you're being safe. And then there are dual hours that you fly with an instructor. Initially you're going to fly with an instructor. You're going to build dual hours. He or she is going to tell you, okay, do this, do that. Now you make a radio call here. This is what you see. This is where you turn. This is how you turn. This is how you climb. This is how you descend. So, they basically shape up your flying skills right there. So 200 hours, magic number for commercial in India and most places abroad as well. And now, okay, this one. Okay, these are a few photos that I took during flying. As you can see, it's really low level flying. This is not something where, like how airlines fly, they fly really high up there. You can mostly just see clouds, but we fly kind of like below clouds or around them, and you get to see beautiful views like this. It's insane. It's really fun. It's really nice, and it's so worth it. And another thing that I would want to talk about here is, the fact that although this stuff sounds really fun, and it really is, one thing that really, gets a lot of people out of nowhere is the fact that, you have to pay a lot. So you could expect to spend anything from 30 lakhs to about 50. But again, it's a big amount to pay for just 200 hours and all that. But you have scholarships and other things. So at least in abroad, like here, I'm doing my training from Canada. We have ways to get scholarships and you can apply to those. And, you can definitely cut down your expenses. And other times, there are students who do cadet programs, not the ones in India, because there you have to pay out of your pocket. Abroad, I know in US, you have cadet programs where you have to prove yourself, like give exams and interviews. And if you clear those, sometimes they barely charge you anything or it's done for free. So, which is a huge thing. Obviously, you get to fly for free, even at training level, that's a really big thing. So, yeah. And okay, so this is a video. I was a passenger in this flight. So you can see these buildings right here. We're basically just flying above this. So this is somewhere in downtown Vancouver, and it's beautiful. And yeah, just enjoy this. It's a really small one. Yeah. And this one, again, I was a passenger in this. As you can see, I only record when I'm a passenger. I don't want to really record too much when I'm flying myself. Sometimes I do. So this one is a low-wing plane, and we're taking off in this. And, I basically record the takeoff, and I have another video, which I'll again play towards the end, where I take off and I have the camera stuck on the backside of me. So I am not really holding it. I'm basically focused towards my flight. But this was where I was a passenger and I was just enjoying. So the one towards the end, I don't know if you could tell. Okay, so there was this building on the side. That's the ATC building where our small airport is. So when you do your flight training, it's done at a really small airport. And that was the ATC building right there. And bigger airports obviously have one too, and they're bigger buildings. And okay, so this video, something for, a student pilot or any pilot at any point, your first solo flight is the most important one. So that's the one flight, that's your first flight where you fly on your own. So your instructor tells you, okay, you're good to go. You know how to take off, you know how to fly, you know how to land the plane, you know your radio calls, you know everything, you do things safely. You are allowed to fly. And you don't fly for too long. It's a very small flight, but you do it all on your own. And trust me, people get really nervous, and it's overwhelming, but it's the best feeling in the world. And right after that, this is something that a lot of places have, is called the water ceremony. So whoever does their solo, their friends and their instructors and everyone throw water on them. I don't know why. Maybe because you're so worked up, with your solo, that they just want to cool you down and they want to put water on you. I don't know. It's a thing. And this was for me. As you can see, I'm standing right there, really happy. Got my solo done. I got my solo done last year in June, on the 16th of June. Yes, you remember your date once you get your solo. And yeah, so my friends and my instructor are throwing water on me, and I just thought of sharing that because it's one of the best feelings. And if you ever want to be a pilot, you ever think about being a pilot, expect this.
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
So that's my instructor right there.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. There's one more. There's one Rahim back for you. Go. All right. Go.
Okay, so as you could see, that one, it was not just water. My friends were really mean and they put soap in it too. So don't do that with your friends. And this video I thought of sharing because this is something you do like in the second half of your training usually. So it's as you can see, night flying. So initially you fly during the day, and then eventually, just like your parents in India tell you, oh, you have a curfew, you have to come back home before this time. And once you grow up, you're like, okay, I'm an adult, I can stay out for longer. That's literally what happens with a pilot too. You are allowed to then start flying towards night. You have to do something called a night rating, where you fly for some time with your instructor at night, show them like, yes, I know how to fly at night, because flying at night is a totally different thing, because you don't have much light. So it's kind of like tricky, but it's a part of your training, and obviously you have to learn how to fly during the night because airlines do that. So yeah, and this was again somewhere near Vancouver, and it's really beautiful, and you can basically expect to have beautiful views like these. And I'll just play the video for you guys. Really small again, yeah. But yeah, so it's like the video doesn't do much justice to the view, but it was really nice. And it's it's done at a very low altitude, so you're flying really close to the ground. You actually get to see, sometimes like my friends who actually have lived here in Vancouver, they actually see their house and they're like, oh yeah, I live there, that's my house, or that's my school, I did my 12th grade from there. And it's such an amazing feeling where you drive on these streets, and then you're flying above it and you're like, oh yeah, I know that place, I know that place. And it's a crazy feeling altogether, and it's totally different view, such beauty. And then you get to do that at night, so again, it's really amazing. Just on a side note here, one thing that I wanted to mention that I've put on my list of discussions is, once you do become a pilot, so you can expect to be paid anything from 1 lakh to 2 lakh rupees per month if you are a first officer. If you afterwards end up becoming a captain, which you will after a few years, after a few hours, you could expect to be paid anything from say 2.5 lakhs to say 5 lakhs per month as well. So you definitely get paid really well. This is obviously pre-COVID, and then during COVID, pilots were laid off, and now they're picking up the pace again, and the salaries are going back to that amount. And it's a really good salary. Obviously, once you do your 12th grade, you get your bachelor's. Salaries aren't that much in a lot of jobs, unfortunately, but if you do end up becoming a pilot, that is the basic amount of salary. That's the bare minimum that you will get from most of these airlines. That being said, obviously, it depends on what kind of plane you fly and all that stuff as well. But that's the bare minimum range that you can expect. And yeah, here you go. A good pilot is always learning. Again, like I said, you will keep learning. You have to keep giving exams. And one last video that I wanted to show you that I was talking about this entire time was this one right here. So this one, I'm basically flying, and I'm not gonna take too long. I'm gonna basically keep skipping forward because I know you guys have an exam and I don't want to keep you waiting. But you could probably hear me making radio calls here, and you could probably hear the ATC make calls and other people. And I will be taking off and flying in this. So there you go. Okay, awesome. Let's do it.
That's affirmative. Thank you, Pop. Okay, just watch for traffic over Centennial Beach here is headed southbound. Yeah, 1,500 feet, and I think they do have you in sight here, but just you could start a left turn towards Blackie Spit for now, please.
Okay, we're at the left turn for now. We'll maintain 1,000.
Okay, I think he talks to me here.
Charlie, contact ground there, 124.3.
Pop Decker Bravo, have a good day.
Okay.
Beverly, Missoula, just watch for traffic over Delta Air Park is a Fleet Canuck, at 700 feet type and altitude unverified.
That's in traffic over Missoula.
Papa Delta, Pop. Tower, hold short, runway 25 for departing traffic, clear to land, runway 31.
We'll hold short. Papa Delta Papa.
I'll just confirm, hold short 25.
We'll hold short of 25. Papa Delta Papa.
That's me lining to the runway.
Papa Tower, surveillance services terminated, change our route today.
That's the windsock right there. If you can see to the leftmost corner.
Victor Golf.
Who's next at Echo?
Full power applied. Pages of the
Tower,
green.
line up runway 25 at Echo, and wait, I will have traffic crossing
Airspace
Delta to Charlie.
alive.
Line up and very, India Foxtrot. Line.
50 knots.
Tower, Foxtrot the Bravo, ready on Echo.
Okay, Victor Bravo Tower, line up runway 25 at Echo, number 2 for departure behind the Cessna in position, or going to position.
Victor the Bravo, lining up.
November Lima Zulu Tower, number 1, runway 25. Number 1, November Zulu. November Kilo Tower, traffic off your left-hand side, a little bit lower, head to southbound Cessna 2000, surveillance services terminated, change our route. Thank you, Papa Sierra, now cleared direct runway 31.
400 feet.
Now, clear direct runway 31, take Papa here.
One head towards Blocky Spit, and then from there, the right base runway 31, squawk it in.
Tower, India Foxtrot Bravo with 0 at 1000.
India Foxtrot Mike Tower identified.
50 to go.
India Foxtrot Mike.
Level off.
Barter Bay Tower, Cessna 140, Gulf, Charlie, November Echo, over Highway 91, 900 feet, inbound for touch and go.
And I'm just gonna skip a little ahead.
Rolling ahead, 152 will be headed towards the courthouse. You're headed towards the bridge, clear for takeoff, runway 25. Victor Golf Tower, surveillance services terminated, change all route frequencies, have good luck.
Thank you, Victor Golf. Okay, cleared en route. 191.
So as you can see, that's basically the general idea about how you are going to be flying. And this was me flying all on my own, solo flight. And it's a beautiful day. It's so sunny. As you can see, the mountains right there, clear visibility, barely any clouds. And the radio calls, so as you can hear, they keep going on. So ATC is basically talking to all the planes. You have to be very careful about when they're talking to you. So as you can see there on the plane, right above the control column, it says CGVVG. That's my call sign. So that's Charlie Golf, Victor Victor Golf. So you have full forms, standard, phonetics for alphabets that again in radio license you learn, and those are your call signs. And whichever plane you're flying, it has a different call sign. Like every car has a different number plate. Every plane has a different call sign. So the minute ATC calls your call sign, you're supposed to be paying very good attention. You don't want to miss your calls, and you want to make sure what they're talking to you about, what they're telling you. And then you want to act according to that. Sometimes, they might tell you to do something that you're not able to do. You could just say unable. Sometimes they just, give you traffic separation. So you want to make sure you're away from other planes. You don't want to get into some other planes. So it's basically things like this that, you can expect. It's a really small plane. As you can see, I already told you, it's a single engine plane. This is the plane that you're going to be doing your training in, compared to the big photo that I showed you initially, where those two pilots are flying with a lot of big ass, screens. And it's really, really, really different from where you start. So it's a small plane, few instruments, few switches and buttons, but you definitely get a very good idea about, how to do things. I just show you guys one tiny last video. I think it's this one. So I was flying with my instructor, and I think I land the plane here. That's the runway right there. So I don't know if I'm actually landing, but I'll just keep it really short. And then, if anyone has any questions after that, you guys can feel free to ask me, or you can run to your exam either ways. So that's the basic view that you get for landing. And after this, if anyone has any questions to ask me, feel free, and I would love to answer all of your questions. Okay, everyone got everything. No one has any questions. Okay.
Ma'am, what are the problems faced by you during your flight journey?
Sorry?
Journey.
What are the problems faced during flight journey? That's a very good question. It's a very, I would give different answers, but basically something that you would face constantly would be, just overwhelming situations that you're put into. Like, for example, your first solo, and then, you're flying around, you do cross countries, that's like flying from one airport to another. So there are a lot of different scenarios that you're put into, and that can seem very overwhelming. And, that's one of the things where, as a pilot, you have to understand to, just know that you have to be confident, you have to believe in yourself. Another thing is you have to always keep studying. Okay, this is not something which is a problem if you study, because flying is not something that we're taught since we're kids. It's something that you start learning eventually. So something that you have to know is you have to keep studying. In my flight school, they say for every 1 hour of flying, you have to study 4 hours. So you need to, if you ever decide to be a pilot, hopefully someone of you, ends up being a pilot. But if you do, know that there is definitely a lot of hard work. You have to study. And yes, then again, like I previously mentioned, medical fitness is one thing that can get a lot of people into trouble. It really does. COVID again happened back in 2020, and a lot of pilots were affected by that. It does affect you medically, and if it goes overwhelmingly, then you could literally end up never flying again. So it's things like that that you have to consider. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, great.
Ma'am, I want to ask that as being a student of ninth grade, how I can start?
Okay, awesome. So you're ninth grade. Perfect. That was a very long time for me. So ninth grade, I would suggest focusing on your basics. Again, you don't have a lot of math to do in flying. It's just basic calculations. Like you have to learn how to do addition, subtraction, you know, um, during flying. So it's things like these, like if you see my instruments and stuff, so it's basic mathematics, but you need to know the basics really well. In ninth grade, I would suggest, focus on subjects like a little bit on physics, definitely, because you have to understand weight and balance and, center of gravity. You have to understand maybe like a little bit about acceleration and things like that. So I would suggest start, thinking about it that way. And you can start, doing your research about, different types of flight schools. Explore more on the subjects that I talked about, weather, air law. Try to understand what subjects, like what all do they ask you to study and things like that. You could start mentally preparing yourself at this stage. And if you really seriously want to consider being a pilot, then obviously, you need to then start thinking about having science, basically physics and math in your 11th and 12th grade. And you need to have English as well. So English is obviously a mandatory thing in most schools, but physics and math are key.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Man makes history and not the other way around. In periods where there is no leadership,
Why do you want to be a pilot? It was your child dream or you were motivated by someone?
oh wow, thank you for that question. So my father is a pilot, and obviously, ever since I was a kid, my father being a pilot, it was something that was always luckily an option for me to be a pilot. But for the longest time, I was like, no, I don't want to be a pilot. It just seems like a lot of work, and I just kept delaying it. But finally, after I was done with my bachelor's degree and I had to start looking at my master's options and other things, that's when I decided. I was like, you know what, let me look at this option. And it seems so exciting, like you're driving a car, it's like flying a plane, and it just made so much sense for me. And I started exploring that option more. And 2 years later, here I am, doing my flight training, and it has been the best experience for me and the best decision I've made so far.
Thank you, ma'am.
Of presenting the of appreciation to our esteemed Captain Sanjana Saini.
It gives me an immense pleasure to propose the vote of thanks at this event to all dignitaries assembled here. I would like to thank our guest speaker, Captain Sanjana Saini ma'am, who honored this function with her inspirational thoughts. I would like to thank our beloved principal ma'am, staff members, and our student for making this function as a grand success. Once again, I would like to thank one and all present here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.